So I'd like to welcome everyone to another outstanding Green at Google Talk. Today's featured speaker is Gernot Wagner. He's an economist at the Environmental Defense Fund and also a teacher at Columbia University. He's here to speak about his book, Will the Planet Notice? We all have a bias for individual action, whether that means buying reusable grocery bags that we then forget on our next trip to the grocery store, or just plain recycling. We do the right thing, or at least what we think is the right thing, but what sort of macroeconomic changes need to happen in order to improve the environmental situation globally? Like, how can we truly stop global warming? And so Gernot outlines this call to action in his book. He describes the value of large-scale economic policies and social changes that can really save us from environmental catastrophe. Concepts like global property rights and carbon credits are discussed at length in his book. And so we'll have some time for questions at the end using the Q&A mic, but for now, please join me in welcoming Gernot to Google. Thank you.
Thanks, Cliff. So, welcome everyone. I guess Google being Google, I don't need to tell you what we are up against here when it comes to global warming, right? So we all sort of believe the science, but just for a second, indulge me and think about a spinning ice skater, right? When she puts her arms close to her body, close to her axis, she spins quicker. When she extends her arms, she spins slower. Simple physics, really. Well, the exact same phenomenon is at work by now for the planet. Ice melts at the poles, water accumulates at the equator, and the planet's rotation slows down. It's picoseconds, right? Fractions of a second, but still, it's detectable. And it's happening at an accelerating rate. So just in case anyone ever asks you whether this is real, global warming by now is literally slowing down the rotation of the planet. So yes, I believe the science, or rather, I think the science to be true. That is, astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson says, the good thing about science is it's true no matter whether you believe in it or not. So what are we doing in response to this, right? So we have this daunting problem. We know it is a problem. What are we doing in response? And there is this amazing disconnect between the effects on the scale of slowing down the planet's rotation, and the kinds of things we are trying to do in response. All right, so the most committed of us, I included, of the ones who believe the science to be true, the environmentalists, we recycle, we bike to work, we avoid out-of-season grapes at all cost. We carry home our locally grown apples in organic and locally sourced canvas bags. We do all the right things. Just, of course, unfortunately, none of that adds up to enough, right? Newsflash, recycling won't stop global warming. It's sad but true, and you can try to be no-impact man, but guess what? No-impact man has no impact on the planet. It's an extremely uncomfortable and sort of annoying message in a sense, but it's so logical if you just look at the numbers and ask yourself whether the planet will notice. And, I mean, that sort of jumps out at you. Right, so just quickly indulge me in this. Right? Let's start with sort of 300 million Americans. Right? One person going from 20 tons of CO2 on average, the US average, down to 0. Well, average, still 20 tons. 300 million Americans, 300,000 drops in a bucket. Impact of one person, less than a drop in a bucket, right? So you sort of keep going along these lines. But of course, that's an extreme situation, right? One individual, no impact. Fine, we know that. We clearly need to do more. We need an army of no-impact men. We sort of need to go out and create a movement. So create an army of recyclers. Don't just recycle. Tell your neighbor to recycle. Tell your kids to recycle. Or, I guess more to the point, tell your parents to recycle. But still, right? It's now a little bit more difficult to look at once you look at sort of mass movements of people doing the right thing. It's no longer quite as obvious as strawman to knock down. But once again, even if you look at sort of amazing mass movements, the numbers simply don't add up. Right? So 300 million people, all of them recycle. Or 7 billion people, all of them recycle. Well, one problem clearly is if you look at the globe, right, 7 billion of us, going from 20 down to 19, it's pretty much as easy as taking a staycation, right? Don't take that one cross-country flight, and you'll cut your carbon budget by about 1 ton. If you ask someone to go from like 2 tons of CO2 emissions down to 1, slightly more difficult. And there are about 3 or 4 billion people on the planet who basically have nowhere to go but up. But let's stick to the recycling example just for a second. No surprise, right? It turns out that getting millions or perhaps billions of us together to do the right thing still won't be enough. And you can really, you can go as big as you want, right? So look at the biggest movement in history. It's got to be a religion. Catholic Church, right? 1 billion members. And just assume that, for argument's sake, that everyone follows the Pope's lead. So you have 1 billion people doing the right thing, decreasing their emissions, let's just say to 0. What's the effect of that? Well, you just decreased emissions significantly, right? But they go down once in that one given year, but the trend is still pointing up. And the effect essentially will register the same way sort of as a major recession would. Right, so in 2008, when Lehman took a nosedive, the world economy followed soon enough. Emissions went down, markets crashed, people polluted less, fine. And as soon as economies started growing again, it was back to business as usual. Right? Emissions going up and up and up. Our current technologies and the way we organize ourselves as a society still means that emissions after that bump go up and up year after year. It takes more than even getting 1 billion people to do the right thing. Now, again, right, none of that is exactly sort of comfortable or comforting here. And the point, of course, is that it's not that we shouldn't be doing all these good things. The point is that we all need to be doing much, much more. But, of course, we don't. Right? That's the real conundrum that we're in here. And that's the key point from an economist speaking here. That the real bummer is that when you look at the way environmentalists try to have us live, take trains everywhere, recycle, do all the right things, we don't get there. The planet's going to be toast. Right now, why bother? Why recycle? Right? Why do all these things is sort of the obvious next question, of course. And on one level is, well, because it makes us feel good. Right? It's sort of on a personal level, right? Recycle because you get the benefit. It makes you personally feel good. We want to do something, anything, right? So psychologists have a word for that. It's called action bias. Right? You want to act in the face of all that knowledge of what is happening. Well, unfortunately, there is another phenomenon at work here too. It's called single action bias. You do one thing, and you think you've made the difference. Right? So you refuse the plastic bag at the register, and then you walk your groceries back to your car. Or worse, you refuse the plastic bag at a takeout counter, and then you walk your takeout order onto a plane. You've just done your one good thing for the day, but, well, everything else you're doing for the day presumably somehow adds up to the 20 tons of emissions. And the result of this, of single action bias, it's phenomenal mass delusion in many ways. Significantly more Democrats thought that the environment was getting better 1 week after President Obama took office than a year earlier. As if the single act of voting for Obama essentially just made everything just dandy. That's a problem, to put it mildly. So the only way to make a difference here, the only way to make the planet notice, if you will, is to make doing the right thing in the self-interest of everyone. It's doing good but doing well, right, in sort of the purest sense of the word. And, well, that statement, of course, is precisely why economists are so often, well, loathed by everyone else, and why it's tough to be in polite company, or at least when you're on the invited back list, right? When you do show up to any of these conversations around a dinner table, it's self-interest, not self-sacrifice, that makes the difference. So let's go back to recycling again. The bête noire here of the environmental movement are plastic bags. Right? We all know we should be bringing our own bags to the store, but sometimes it's just so much more convenient to get the plastic bag, or sometimes we just forget to bring the canvas bag. Well, turns out there's a pretty simple way to make people not forget. Ireland introduced a so-called plast tax in 2002. It's a tiny fee. So when you walk into a store in Dublin, by now you pay 22 euro cents per bag. It's tiny, right? Shouldn't matter. You don't notice it on a 100 euro purchase, right? Your weekly grocery purchase. But still, plastic bag use in Ireland declined by 90%. 90. 1 billion bags per year. A 22-cent fee. Starting last year, Washington, D.C. Has been charging 5 cents on all disposable bags, paper or plastic, within its city borders. And early signs, once again, point to huge shift. The 5 cents, that 1 nickel, doesn't make the difference. It's the principle that counts. Right? So suddenly not receiving a bag at the register is the new normal. And consumer behavior changed. But of course, you're talking about plastic bags here. Yes, 1 billion of them is a problem, but it's still far from global warming and far from sort of slowing down the rotational speed of the planet here. So let's try to go a step bigger here. Let's go from 20 cents to something like $20. That's the damage every ton of CO2, carbon dioxide, pollution causes to economies, ecosystems, and health, human lives. The average American emits around 20 tons. So we are looking at $400 worth of damage per American per year due to CO2 pollution. That's a conservative estimate, by the way. So by some measures, we're looking at about $100 and more of damage per ton of CO2. But just for sake of argument here and simplicity, I guess, in calculating, let's stick to the $20 a ton. $20 a ton of damage right now, by the way. Not the distant future, right now. Every one of us per ton. And who pays for those $20? Well, we all do, right? Every one of us. The cross-country flight that I took from New York to SFO to come here cost about half a ton of CO2 emissions per passenger. Right, so half a ton, $10 for the flight, $20 for the round trip. And of course, I didn't pay a penny. We all pay. Right, my cross-country flight adds fractions of a penny to everyone else's costs, and everyone else's cross-country flight adds fractions of a penny to everybody else's costs. Right? We all pay. We just don't pay for our own pollution. We pay for everybody else's. Now, right, that knowledge leads some of us to voluntarily chip in a few bucks to offset our emissions. You can go to TerraPass or a number of other sites and basically pay someone else to plant a tree or cover a methane pit on your behalf. And of course, yes, right? So we should be doing all these things, like plant trees, cover methane pits, right? Do all these things. I'm not saying these are bad things per se. It's all good. But none of these voluntary offsets motivate anyone to fly less. Like, why else would airlines even offer this possibility to passengers buying tickets on their sites? Right? So by now you can go to certain airlines' websites. First you pay for the ticket, and then they ask you to spend another $20 to offset the pollution that you will have caused once you fly. It's amazing, right? So would anyone fly less because of this? Or does this make you feel worse about flying? Well, airlines don't think so. Otherwise, they wouldn't offer you the chance to offset your flight right there on the airline's website. So yes, they want to make you feel good about flying and, frankly, doing more of it. Right? So airlines quite consciously use these voluntary offsets basically as a marketing ploy to make green-conscious passengers choose them over the competitor. And as one effect, people may actually fly more. Right? So we can look at studies, and this moral licensing effect does in fact appear. It's small, but it's there. And once again, right, that's a problem if you look at the whole dimension of this problem here. But of course, it's still not as big a problem as the second effect that's a result, of sort of an indirect effect of this, which is paying more for these offsets voluntarily doesn't do anything to incentivize airlines to do anything different. Right? So yes, I mean, they might paint their tail wings green or put a tree on their annual report, but that's about it. Right? It doesn't lead any of them to switch to fuel-efficient planes. It doesn't lead them to adjust their routes. Nothing like it. Now, airlines, of course, do these things. Right? As oil prices go up, suddenly, magically, the time between actual takeoff and actual touchdown gets bigger. Airlines are deciding to fly slower to save fuel and fuel costs. Right? So, but they don't do these things out of the goodness of their heart. They do them out of economic concerns, self-interest, pure and simple. And they don't certainly, right? So they don't do it because like sacrifice or something along these lines figures into their picture, and certainly not because any environmentalist offers to pay $20 to offset emissions from the flight. And you know what? That's okay. Airlines are in the business, or any business, so for that matter, airlines are one of them, are in the business of making money. Well, in the airlines case, I guess it's not losing as much year after year, but still, right? I mean, that's the core business, and that's the game we've set up for them, right? So it's capitalism. You do something better or cheaper or more beautifully than the next guy, and you'll make a buck or two. So just to re-emphasize that fact here, right? So as a non-driving vegetarian environmentalist living on an NGO salary, it's okay to make money. What's not okay is if the playing field is rigged. So when every ton of CO2 causes $20 worth of damage, but the cost of it is essentially zero, or perhaps it's even subsidized, that's far from a level playing field. Every ton of coal, every barrel of oil causes more in damages to the economy and society than it adds value to GDP. That's far from a level playing field. When I get to fly across the country and don't pay for the pollution I cause, while everyone else suffers the consequences, that's far from a level playing field. It's privatizing profits, privatizing the benefits of our actions, and socializing costs on a massive, massive scale. So what needs to be done, right? What must be done, or what can we do? Well, I realize I can't sort of quite leave it like this. First rule of speech making, I guess, is thou shalt not end on a downer. So let me try to sort of just turn things around here just a bit. As we saw with the plastic bags, we do have the tools at our disposal. Right? We have the tools at our disposal to do the right things, to cause massive shifts with tiny changes in the way the system works. In that case, it was the Plast tax, 20 cents a bag, and bag use went down by 90%. 1 billion bags less. Significant change, tiny policy shift. That's a very hopeful story right there, right? And we can use the same idea, and we can cause the same effect. And look at climate change, right? Levelizing the playing field, pricing or limiting pollution to such an extent that we don't have massive implicit and explicit subsidies for pollution. Remember acid rain by any chance? Well, I don't, actually. I wasn't around back then, or at least I wasn't conscious. But, of course, it was an enormous problem in the 70s and 80s. Kids dying, forests dying, stone sculptures literally melting in the rain. Well, the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments were passed and decreased acid rain by over 50%, all the while letting companies themselves decide how to do it and to innovate themselves out of the problem. As a result, benefits have exceeded investments for this one amendment by about 30 to 1. That seems to be a good general pattern here, by the way. So the Clean Air Act of 1970, the ratio of benefits to costs, benefits to investments, again, about 30 to 1. Every dollar invested yielded about $30 in benefits. And most of these benefits, by the way, are human health related. Right? So this isn't birds feeling better about themselves. That's good too, but it's human health that improved. Right? Fewer people sick and dying. And that, of course, translates into real economic benefits as well. So forget about the fact for a moment that it's a bad idea to poison our kids. Just for the sake of protecting them, if you apply hard-nosed economic analysis here, you'll find that the Clean Air Act of 1970 boosted GDP, gross domestic product, in 2010, 40 years later, by around 1.5%. Just to say that again, the Clean Air Act of 1970, a regulation, boosted GDP, economic output, 40 years later. Right? It turns out that not poisoning children makes for more productive workers later on in life, and GDP goes up as a result. Right? It's sort of the moral equivalent of arguing against child labor based on the fact that having children in school makes for more productive workers later. But still, we do in fact see that. We see that in hard economic data. So we've done this before, and it works. And now, once again, we have this incredible policy opportunity to boost well-being, boost economic growth along the lines of the Clean Air Act. The policy opportunity, and yes, I'm saying opportunity here, is global warming. Right? The problem is even bigger than what we experienced in the 50s and 60s that led to the Clean Air Act, to the Clean Water Act, and all these other dozen or so environmental laws that Richard Nixon signed into law in the 70s after creating the Environmental Protection Agency, which was once again Richard Nixon who did that. We, of course, also have much smarter and more flexible tools available today than we did back then. So, for example, the Europeans right now are already limiting carbon emissions and in a fairly flexible way here, an emissions trading system, cap and trade, essentially. Starting next year, it also includes airlines. So then flying in Europe, at least, will no longer be socialized, right? With the CO2 pollution cost paid by society. And it won't be up to a few volunteers to pay a few bucks extra for the flight. Everyone will be doing it. That's the kind of policy change that really makes a difference. Right? California is following suit soon with its own limit on greenhouse gas emissions, and by now countries from Mexico to China are looking into similar policy changes. Lots of momentum. Of course, the real momentum, the real policy shift would happen once Washington starts to act. That's still a ways off at this point. But still, that's the solution right here. So yes, right? Keep recycling, buy local, bike to work, bike around Google campus with the free bikes sitting outside here. Do all the right things. But in addition, let's make sure we do take this next step and look to real, fundamental policy changes to level the playing field for all. Thank you.